All right, let's get started. So welcome to Futurice Tech Weeklies. And today we're going to have two presentations. First, James Stone is going to present about how to make your own bootstrap, so CSS framework. And then after that, I will be presenting about why you should do shitty, useless side projects. So please, stage is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is James Stone, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about living or coded style guides and how you might go about building your own bootstrap. And if you're interested in this, I have the talk kind of also recorded in a different format, and there's another sub-talk. So if you're interested, you can just email me or ping me on Flowdoc. All right. So here's some information about me, and I gave this talk in Turku in October, so some of this is a little bit dated. So I just grabbed the slides. But I've been focused in kind of building front-end code for different development teams, usually working with agencies. So usually there's a redesign, something like this, and I build a UI component library, style guide, and hand that off, or work with an engineering team to build that out. So that's been kind of my experience. So a lot of times I'm this in-between person for design and engineering, where if they're not sure how to solve some of the visual problems, or the design team doesn't quite have the chops to build the CSS and build in a way that's kind of scalable, then that's usually been me on these projects. And I'm also a ZURB Foundation certified preferred. I've been involved with that ecosystem for quite some time. So if you have interest or you're working with that, then you can chat with me about that. And fun fact, the Futurice website is built on ZURB Foundation, so you can look at the source if you have access to that. But it's a little fun hat tip to Foundation. So where I want to start is with brand guidelines. So who here is a developer? And do we have any designers or developer designers in the group? Probably not. So maybe I can talk more freely, right? So has anyone ever been handed off some brand guidelines and said, hey, build out this website? Yeah? Okay. And what was that experience like? Was it pretty easy process or kind of like this? Yeah. So I'm going to open up some brand guidelines, and it says 2014, but I guess since October they've updated them, and they're a little bit nicer, but I think they're still indicative of the problem that we get often from design. They're thinking about things from a design perspective, and it's just different. And it's not entirely helpful. It's like a little bit helpful in terms of branding, but it doesn't solve all the problems that we need to solve to build like a web app or a marketing site with it. So this is huge. I think it used to be 16 pages and now it's 56, right? So it's just expanding in scope. And I'm just going to flip through this and get kind of to the point, but we start to get into some colors, right, which is something we might use on the web, and then we've got even some hex value codes, right? So this might be useful in terms of setting the colors. And we've got this like, do this, don't do that, right? And a lot of times when I think of brand guidelines, there's like this font and like how much spacing we're going to have around the font. And I think these are all really valid and important in terms of the translation for the web, but they're like just like the logo. I think like how many times do we use a logo on a web app? Like once? Is anyone using a logo more than once? maybe at the bottom, right? in the footer. So there's so much emphasis on this, right? And it's actually very important to have it consistent across all of the brand, but that's just like one small problem that we solve. So this is what I'm trying to convey, is that this isn't really solving the problem we have to solve building a web app. And then we can continue on, and just in case, like we're building some pants or whatever, we're all set. And typography might be a little bit interesting, but again, it's not exactly explained how we would use this on the web, right? We have to go and translate and interpret this. And I think this like interpretation of the brand guidelines is this kind of like in-between state. And if you're being handed off something like, Sketch high fidelity mocks and you're using Zeppelin, then you're maybe saved a little bit from having to interface this way. But hopefully they've solved some of these problems. But you still have to translate and build all these things. Okay. All right, so again, I mentioned that I have like a talk. If you want a copy of the video, just let me know. But what are we looking for? Front-end code, templates, and layouts, along with developer-focused documentation about how to use it. So that would be a lot more useful. So if you've seen Bootstrap or ZURB Foundation, there's extensive examples of how they're used. You can see them in the browser, right? And templates and layouts, like we'd kind of want to see things fully rendered. And if we're not, we're building all of this ourselves, right? And this is what's going to be much more powerful for us in terms of what we might think about as a style guide. Like not the brand guidelines, here's the font, you know, or the logo laid out, but this is like kind of a UI toolkit that we can use to build the entire app. And there also should be a focus on like Sass variables, mixins, HTML, and CSS classes. And so this is independent of whether using React, Angular, jQuery, like anything on the web. I think you can replace Sass with less or CSS variables, but the concepts are still the same. We would kind of like want to systematize and organize everything so that we're not kind of using random colors. Like we don't want to go, oh, that's a green, just grab a random green and add it. We want that specific green. And by using variables, we kind of lock that down. All right. So has anyone created like a living or coded style guide before? Yes? Oh, quite a few. Okay, cool. So what term is a good term to explain what it is? Does anyone have any? Because living style guide kind of sounds strange, right? Yeah, no ideas. Dynamic. I think dynamic's actually a very good way to describe it. Sometimes people say it's a coded style guide, but even that, I don't know that it conveys it. But right here, I'm just trying to define what I'm talking about. But it means rebuilding automatically. So sometimes people will create developer documentation, but it's static. So sometimes people put in a Google Doc or Word or whatever you're doing, but then it can't be updated automatically. So it's not very useful because as soon as you change something, it's kind of out of date. And it doesn't represent the way it looks, right, if you change the branding. And then also living, and this is kind of important, and I really focus often like the CSS context of the project, like what's the visual nature, the styling. But this is really important that it kind of shares the same CSS structure, right? You don't want to build something that's like a living style guide and then implement it in a radically different way, because then you kind of lose the continuity between the living style guide and the actual live project. All right, so I'm going to talk really just about this coded example pairs, which are HTML, a live example, and some sort of documentation. And so if you've used Bootstrap, you probably read these docs. They show you the live example, and they have the coded example there so you can copy and paste and see how it's working. So I don't know if you've seen this talk. Mark Otto, does everyone know who that is, the creator of Bootstrap? Maybe not. He's the original creator, and a long time ago, there's actually this lineage between ZURB Foundation and Bootstrap because he worked at ZURB. And just to explain, they're an agency. I think there's like maybe 20 or 30 people there, and they produce right now like about 100 different sites per year. So I think I figured out that's like every couple of days, it's like a new website, right? And so what they're doing is strong visual design, right, and branding. And so they wanted something that they don't have to repeat all the time. So they kind of build this building blocks that they build upon, and they can kind of theme. And so in his talk, he was saying we shouldn't just be using Bootstrap, right? He's kind of dispelling this myth that we just use Bootstrap and everything should look like Bootstrap. But he said we should be building little mini bootstraps per project, right? So I think it doesn't have to be based on Bootstrap, but if you want it to be more reusable across the team and have that documentation and kind of live on beyond just like dumping a bunch of CSS and kind of moving on with the project, it's important to kind of build some sort of mini bootstrap of sorts. And I talk a little bit about what do you do, right? How do you move towards that? Like if you've never built a living style guide. So for existing projects, you just want to use your existing work and kind of move towards organization. So you don't have to reinvent everything and move this direction towards a coded style guide, but just kind of to reuse things. But for new team projects, I think it's very useful, although some people probably will disagree with me, to piggyback on an existing framework that's very similar to your output, right? So I'm not going to say it's Bootstrap or ZURB or Material, but there may be something where a lot of it's already built. You can kind of speed the process and kind of theme on top of it with CSS. And I think there's some pretty good advantages to that. And when you look at these larger projects, the important thing is like not to copy everything, right? Because they're really extensive. You don't really need everything in Bootstrap for most projects. Like for me, often I don't even use the JavaScript components. Or if I do, maybe I'll rewrite how it's using like modals or tabs or something like that. But the important parts, and I think what they're really good to look at, is architecture, but not too much, because these are very large projects. So they're not indicative of like what you might be working on necessarily. So maybe they're a little bit over-architected and overly structured. And the other part that's quite good is this idea of coded example pairs. And this is sounding kind of jargony, and I keep repeating it, but it's the terms that are used a lot in design systems, so I'll keep repeating. And then also they have easy navigation. So Bootstrap, it's quite easy to go and find a component. You can search through it, grab it, get a copy of what you're trying to do, and move on. And the other thing is make it living. So many of them have documentation for older versions, right? You can change it, you can update, and so they don't actually rebuild the docs every time, it's all automated. I'm not sure if this is the easiest to see on this screen, but this is an example of the Bootstrap documentation kind of explained as a style guide, because that's really all it is. It's a living style guide. It's just a massive system. And so basically what we have is we have the rendered part of the CSS and HTML here, and then we have our coded pair example. When you look at that, we have the code right underneath it. We have this easy navigation to different components, and sometimes there's search. And then often there's some sort of more documentation. So this is an introduction to the components, how it's working, different options of how it might be added. So in addition to just looking at this example, there might be other options or classes that you add to it. Yeah. So this has been my process. And a lot of what I've been doing is building these kind of like mini bootstraps, so to speak, for different agencies and different projects. And this is kind of the process that I always go through. And the first thing is, like, if I'm coming in on an existing project, maybe there's things that have been done already prior, or maybe I'm starting fresh. But I try to break up the Sass into logical files and sections. And so I have site-wide helpers, navigation, etc. So this can be really, really detailed. And I think with some things like React, you might have per component. But some things are going to be shared amongst it. But just keeping it organized so it's easy to find. And this was kind of the thing I was talking about, right? So with Bootstrap or whatever you're adding, having this master link back to the framework of choice is a huge time saver, because you don't have to write documentation for everything all over again. You can just lean on the existing components and just explain what's different, if anything, right? And the other thing is to create a heading for each logical section, and that's just the same thing, so we can quickly navigate and understand. All right. And I think sometimes it's really overthought about, like, how do you create this coded style guide and what is it? And often I'm actually doing it at the end of the project. And I know there's some ideas of building the components and things like Storybook, where it's kind of built in this isolated space and then you expand. But it's usually something I've done kind of at the end of a project before it's delivered to the client. And so I've built out all of the HTML templates, I've created all the Sass, everything's kind of organized and prepped and ready to go. And it's literally just a case of going and looking for good examples of how to demonstrate and kind of copy paste and adding documentation to clarify. So it's really not that complicated to add this at the end. So I also give some examples: modifier classes, options, or context. So if it's only used in particular places. And I think it's really good to be descriptive. So like, not this like don't do this, do that, with like many, many examples, but to be really clear, like if this is only used in the navigation header, like just be explicit and talk about it, right? Maybe it's not intended to be used everywhere. And the final part of that process is to package it and share it with the team. And there's different ways to do that, but a good way is to have a live site where you can go and view it just like the Bootstrap docs, and they could be shared amongst the team and kind of rebuilt. So the process I've been using in the tool is called ZURB Style Sherpa, and it can be used with anything. And this is a good introductory tool. It's not by any means the most advanced, but it's a quick way to create a coded style guide for any project. And it's going to work with Bootstrap, your own internal code. It'll probably work with just about anything. It's a static site generator that's kind of bundled with it called Panini. But it basically takes a markdown file with a special markdown of the GitHub fences, code fences, and it says HTML_example. And you just add that, and then it kind of does its magic, and it's already ready to go. Okay. So I'm going to skip through this, but I want to show some examples. So this is from a project I worked on, and this is pretty common, but there usually is some sort of grid system. And I've worked with a lot of like e-commerce websites, so there usually is some sort of grid because they're doing all sorts of weird things with the layout. And here, I didn't have to document anything. Now, some people do, but I think it's a waste of time. I just simply link back to the original documentation for the grid system and just kind of call it a day. And if I change the grid system to a different type, it's quite easy just to change this too. This is an example of a component in Style Sherpa. So this is the markdown that we would have in the HTML example. And it just looks like standard HTML. But the big thing is I don't have it repeated in many places. It's only in this one place, the example. And I could just literally copy and paste it here and write a little bit about it. And then it's formatted and kind of in one particular place, and it's easy to rebuild. And this is an example of what that looks like rendered out. Okay. And what it does, it also creates this menuing system and all this kind of stuff. And there's other tools that you could use. This is kind of an entry point. But what I wanted to point out is I'm really getting the same kind of idea as Bootstrap being built in this living style guide, where I have all the different components listed, right? I have these coded example pairs, and I have more documentation. I'm just maintaining it in a markdown file. And this can even live inside the main project and be built like on a separate process. So that's it. If you have any questions about this, or if you want to chat about CSS frameworks versus not, let me know. Yeah.
Hello. Thanks for the presentation. I really liked it. What I was thinking is that I've been building quite a lot of applications lately that just happen to be using web technologies. And I'm not sure if this is common, but I kind of feel that the components that we build are pretty much single use. They don't appear that much anywhere else in the application. So do you think it's still worth it to make a style guide, even though basically it would end up having every single thing that's on the application?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if I understand correctly, you have like this single-use component. It's only used in this particular place and never again, and probably in the future would never be reused. Is that correct?
Right,
yeah.
right. So we obviously have some lists or like multiple cards of items, but the lists or the card collections only appear once.
Yeah, I think for myself, I probably wouldn't add that to a style guide. And the work that I've done for this particular agency, often they were very limited in their in what they would deliver to the client. So there was a specificity of like 5 templates. They would do like kind of 5 major layouts, right? And then there would be these additional things that they would think that they would reuse across the app that are maybe included in these or maybe not. And I think where you really gain something is where the team would have this reuse, like something they're probably going to use it again, like say a date picker or something like this. It's custom styled, or maybe it's something beyond a date picker, like a cluster of components that would be reused. I think it's when you have this reusability and you think that in the future, someone on the team, and especially in a team environment, because if you're a single developer, right, and you're doing everything yourself, there's not really a lot of benefit to building something like this. It's really just to communicate with your team. And so I don't think there would be a lot to add by taking these single-use components, but you would probably want to demonstrate somewhere. So it could just be in the app, or what I've done is created these front-end templates as kind of a precursor to being implemented in the app. So just showing it being used if it's very complex. But yeah, I don't think there's an advantage there. It's just if it's reused a lot. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks.
Hello, 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 hello. Okay. So yeah, was maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, we had a pretty big project where we had an interactive style guide built into the app, and some of the use cases not mentioned thus far have been, for example, to be able to, like, even if you included all the components that are single use, having them listed in a single document which you can browse through pretty quickly was a way of kind of regression testing for the app, in that you can then just open the style guide and cruise through it like from the top to bottom and see that everything is fine. And this was before things like Redux and time travel and magic like that were a thing. So it also helped in just developing things, so that if you have a big backbone application that you cannot easily snapshot and then reload, like to get to some place, and then you have a component that you're developing that is very, very far into some, 15 different clickety-clicks that you need to do to get to that place where you modify that component with your live reload thing, then having that kind of extracted into a standalone page where it just sits staring at you while you iterate on it, while you don't have to kind of like go to it all the time in the application. Those were, I guess, some of the use cases not mentioned yet.
Yeah, and sometimes what I've done, I don't know if you've done this too, but I've created like a kitchen sink page where all of the components live, and that's a really easy way to do cross-browser testing where they're kind of in isolation, but you can quickly run that through the gauntlet without having to hit a lot of pages. So that's one thing that I've done. It's not really the exact same process, but I think it's good, like even though you're building that component isolation, it may not be used, you certainly should run it through the normal paces, and you don't want it buried, like 4 or 5 levels into the app behind a login to be able to test it, if possible.
Yeah, and like one more thing, when you have all of that in there, and you mentioned the cross-browser testing, which is really nice, like a persistent pipe dream for me has been to use that with some kind of visual regression testing thing, so that you could actually automate that, and then you would have that single page where, again, you don't need to browse through your application, you just like have everything there, and then you can get the divs and everything. But alas, it is very hard to set up, and I've never really succeeded in that.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks. You mentioned a couple of times handing off the style guide to the client. Have you had instances where you had to maintain the style guide and keep evolving it with your team? Because the challenge I ran into often is, how do you actually prevent the slow drift of death of the style guide? There, people might not go to the web page, or and so on and so forth. So have you found any kind of processes for making this, keeping this living style guide alive in a sense?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in the case of the agency, right, they would hand it off, and I really don't know what happened. So it's quite likely that it fell out of adoption once they finished the redesign, or maybe they continue to use it. But I've also had cases where I've worked on like a team of Drupal developers and maintained over a couple of years this maintained style guide. And in this case, they were not as strong maybe with the CSS components. So it gave them a way to kind of keep referring back as they were building out new pages. And so rather than them contact me, hey, we want to do this new layout, we're adding this new functionality, they would actually take those components and build it out themselves. And then maybe I might just look at it for a quick, so it took a lot of that work like, because they would really focus that work towards me, and it made everyone a little bit more self-sufficient. And so that's where I've seen it maintain, and that would be like active e-commerce sites when you're kind of maintaining it in line. And what often would happen is one thing I would deliver is this smaller style guide where it's limited, and then the other thing I would do is take this and expand it, because sometimes the patterns don't always translate, right? Just taking components and creating a whole layout with it, that's a big gap, right? A little bit like we were talking about, you know, with Dartmouth, right? Like, how do you take the logo and some colors and build a whole site with it? So at some point, maybe you need to kind of refine those patterns into layouts to understand them. But I don't know for sure. And I think it's a big problem, right, with design systems or style guides. Like, how do you maintain it? How do you use it? I think by making it useful, or the team's using it frequently, that if it's useful, people are going to keep using it. If you just did something just because you wanted to, and no one's on board with how to use it, and they just want to do their own thing, I don't think it's going to be very useful. Like, if there's a team of like 5 or 6 people, everyone's got really good chops, they all want to do the visual stuff themselves by hand, it's like probably not going to be a great fit. But if people don't want to, and you have like a lead on the project that's kind of more focused there, it helps to explain things in a way that's kind of longer lasting, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Any questions from the Hangout remote members? I guess not. And no more local comments, questions? All right, thank you.
I know. I was about to say comment, not a question. I also have a comment as well. Comment, I love it.
All right, let's see. Thanks. So I should start sharing my screen. All right. Let's see. This is a bit loud. All right. Let's get started. So, the title of my talk today is why you should be creating shitty, useless side projects. And the goal here is to encourage everyone to work on silly ideas, side projects, any random idea you want to do, because as I'm going to show here, I have learned a lot while I did this silly side project called onkometrorikki.fi. And yeah, why? You will learn during this presentation. So yeah, what is onkometrorikki.fi? It means, it's Finnish and it means is the metro broken? And it's inspired by onkolänsimetrovalmis.com, which was a web page that showed a static HTML page that said no because it wasn't ready. And inspired by that, I had been thinking about like making this page for a long time, but I never got done or got started with it. So a couple months ago, Futurice had a nice presentation about prototyping. So I decided to start just prototyping it. And it looks like this. It shows, says no. But it also shows, if it's broken, then it shows with red text, it shows yes and the reason. But, and also, in addition to that, there is a Twitter bot that tweets every time the metro is broken or when it gets fixed, or like there's no interruption anymore. And this is something I'm proud of. It actually managed to tweet before the HSL podcast, maybe a couple seconds before, but anyways, I think it's important. And also, if you follow the poikkeusinfo account, you will get notifications for everything that's broken, all the buses and trams and trains and everything. So if you travel, how many of you here traveled by metro? Cool. I don't. I just made this for fun. So yeah, how did I get here, and what did I learn during the process, or like during the project? Of course, it's not code is never done, but at least it works. So I started with the MVP version, was using Futurice's proto repository as a starting point. It uses React. And then I made just a silly backend in Heroku that just returned. At first, it just said every time, yes, it's broken. And then the next version, kind of the first working version, was a silly regex that checked. And it's even stupid. It checks for metro strings ending in metro and ending in lance metro. So what the heck? Why would I do that? And this was not working well because there are also buses that start from a metro station. So it says in the alert, it says metro. So this was just the MVP, and also it was done using React, and I feel like React is boring, so I wanted to try something else, and I'll come to that later. And also at this point, I published it and started tweeting about it, and then I learned that there is no such thing as länsimetro. This account called Metro Rakentuu, which is the account of Länsimetro Oy, which is the builder of Länsimetro, but there is no. They sent me a message that there is no such thing as Länsimetro, so please don't use Länsimetro in the name. I don't know, like it's probably pretty important to them. What? No, I didn't. That was the good thing. I only had onkometrorikki.now.sh, and then after this thing, I decided, okay, I'll buy the domain. So now it's onkometrorikki.fi, and yeah. So in this project, I wanted to try some cool technologies that I haven't been using anywhere else. So I was deploying it to Now, which is a service by Chite, which is pretty cool. So, and they have this, or they have had this for a longer time now already, this Now for GitHub, which kind of builds your, but at first it was just for PRs, so it would deploy your PR to a staging environment and you could check that it works. So I wanted to try that out because I thought it would deploy every commit, so I thought it would be like automatic deployment. So I don't know if this looks any familiar to anybody setting up a building like CI or something. It's like some commits were built successfully, but then it didn't work, and well, in the end I just gave up. It didn't work. And then after that I went back to the documentation and read that it's not meant for deploying every commit. At first it wasn't. So I'll come later to that. And then I decided, okay, Elm is cool. I had been doing Elm in OSSIs like this, Elm Quicks here, and then did I do something else? Yeah. Anyways, I wanted to try Elm in a real world project. So I cleared the decks and rewrote the front end in Elm, which is cool. I used create Elm app as a starting point, and that was nice. And then I improved the backend a bit, added Redis and stuff like that. And also at this point, before this point, I had realized that Heroku free dynos, they go into sleep mode. So it's quite slow if there's no traffic. And of course, at first, you don't have any traffic on this kind of services. So I made a cron. There's a service called cronjob.org that then pinged this page every time, or the backend, every 15 minutes or something. But it didn't help. So in the end, I I ended up buying the hobby dinos, and now I'm paying them $7 a month, or is it euros? I don't know. And then I added Redis caching, because of course at first I had the Twitter bot check the status from the HSL API like every minute, and then whenever a user entered the page, I would check it again. But why would you do that? Of course, I just now, whenever the bot is checking, or like the timer triggers and we're checking the status, then of course I'll just update the cache, and then when a user enters the page, then it's always served from cache, which ends up, I don't know if I have it here, but okay, I have it later in a slide. But the response times are pretty nice. And then somebody told me that, hey, you should make a Twitter bot for this, and I was like, I don't know, I've never done a Twitter bot. But then I just Googled it, and it was super easy. Just using a library. It was easy to get started, but then, of course, getting it working well was a bit more challenging, and it was buggy as hell, and it's written in JavaScript. And also, the library saved my ass, because the Twitter API, because it blocks you from tweeting duplicate tweets. So I think my bot was trying to tweet every minute the same status, but it didn't go through. So yeah, and then later on, like not many weeks ago, I can't remember when, but then Site decided to enable the integration for deployments to now by default to every comment, and I had forgotten about that. And I had it enabled. Then I just pushed some code to master branch, and yeah, here's the bold announcement that now it's cool. And then this happened. It deployed it deployed something. It deployed just the project source code and displayed it on onkometrorikki.fi, and that sucks. So I was like tweeting angry, like, what the hell, what are you doing? And then I got some instructions what I need to do in order to get it working. And I was like trying to read the documentation, and I was like, it started like, you need to add a Docker file. And I was like, shit. I thought at first, maybe my experience are a bit horrible, but I thought first that, okay, adding a Docker file for a static HTML deployment, why would you have to do that? But then, with the help from Futurice and then the documentation, I managed to do it. And it was actually pretty simple. I just added the Docker file, and its content is actually here. It's not long. It just says, use this node, run yarn before you do, and then copy stuff, and run build, and then copy the build site from public folder to the served folder, and that's it. So that was cool. And then, okay, I forgot to mention it, but it didn't work with Elm 0.18. I don't know why. I have no clue why, but the deployments just failed every time. And I don't even remember why I found out that the problem is with Elm. But anyways, I needed to upgrade my project to Elm 0.19. And as some of you maybe have heard or experienced, it might be a pain in the ass, because there are some changes, and it's totally backward compatible. So you have to figure out what to do. But then there's this project called Elm Upgrade, and that was helpful. I just ran a command, and it tried to tell me in clear instructions what fails and what I need to do. And then also there's Elm Slack, where I needed to ask like maybe 10 questions or something, and I was so confused. And then this was the most confusing part. Usually, or like before, in my projects, I was importing Elm. I don't know if you see this. No. But okay, it's a bit, wow. Sorry. Where did I go? Okay, anyways, I was importing main from main.elm before, and then I would say main.embed. and in this div. But now I need to import elm from main.elm and then call elm.elm.main.init. This is so confusing syntax. I don't know. Maybe this could be simplified, but at least this worked, and people in Elm Slack were helpful. They helped me to get it working. And now, every time I push a commit to the master branch, it will deploy it automatically to all these domains, because for backward, like legacy reasons, I have still the onkometrorikki.now.sh, and then also www. So yeah. And also every commit to master branch is also automatically deployed to Heroku or the backend, even though it sometimes does it unnecessary deployment, but it's fine. I just don't want to have to deploy them separately, because it's a tiny project, so it's cool to deploy every commit. And then also I was pretty happy with these response times. The medium response time is something like 5 milliseconds from the backend. Or actually that was, here it says, yeah, something like 30 milliseconds. But I think it's gone even better now. But, here's the but. It's there and it works, but the backend is still JavaScript, and it's horrible. I don't know. I'm going to show a screen to you, and you can raise your. I will show a code snippet, and then you can raise your hand when you see it. If you see something, it's too small. But anyways, this is. Oh, how can I chew? No, I can't chew. But anyways, I don't know if you see it, but there's. Of course, I thought I want to try new stuff also in JavaScript. So I wanted to try async await, which I hadn't been using that much before. But then in the end, I didn't manage to follow the flow of the execution, even though I was using like awaits and stuff like that. It was confusing. So I ended up doing stuff like await new promise. and then I would resolve. So in the end, I could just remove all the async await from the code and use promises. Because in my opinion, promises are more clear. Or like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I just need to learn.
Still sloping like that. That's what you might as well.
Yeah, yeah, or even callbacks. They're fine as well. Okay, I didn't know. Okay, so awaits eats your error messages.
Unless you do a try and catch around everything. Which you have done.
Yeah, I have actually. Yeah, I did it. Yeah, I have tried it.
So you cut the inner thing there and the outer thing in the outer part.
Okay, but yeah, as you might notice, I think I need to rewrite the backend. And anyways, it's JavaScript. I want to anyways get rid of JavaScript, so I want to do it either in TypeScript or something more cool. And so, yeah, the next possible step for this project, I think I need to rewrite the backend, even though it works, but it's JavaScript. And the HSL API actually provides all the like the service alerts in 3 languages. So my goal is to add Samma på svenska and English to the website. It would be quite easy, actually. But I just need to learn. And in that process, I would learn how to do internationalization in Elm. And it would be quite cool. And then I think the website is pretty simple looking, so it might need some design. So if somebody wants to help me with the design, I would appreciate that. And then, yeah, make some profit out of it. No, just kidding. You know, probably not. So what did I learn? Yeah. So I have 3 slides about stuff I learned during this project. There's no Länsimetro, as I explained. It's called Metro. There's M1 and M2 lines. And Länsimetro Oy is the company that builds Länsimetro. Async is difficult, but async await is even more difficult. and promises are okay. You actually at least know what's going on in your code. And yeah, creating a Twitter bot is super easy. But then making it work reliably, tweet whenever you actually should tweet and not tweet when you shouldn't, and so on, is a problem. And then also right now it tweets too eagerly, because HSL API works so that if there's an interruption and then they change the estimated ending time, then they remove it first from the feed and then add a new one. So my bot tweets that, hey, now the metro is not broken anymore before the new interruptions come. So I think I might need to fix that. And then Chite now for deployments, it's pretty nice. It's super fast and it's free even for open source. Okay, so it's free for open source projects, and anyone can go to /_src to see your source code. So if you don't mind, or not the source code, but the source for the files, or is it the source code? I don't know. I need to check. And Heroku with connected to master branch is pretty nice, or even you can have a separate deploy branch if you want. And also, I forgot to add it here, but like managing variables in Heroku is pretty nice for a small project like this. But then variables on scale, like we have at Sanoma, it has been a hassle managing all the different variables. So in a small hobby project, Heroku is pretty nice. And then small amount of variables is manageable. Yeah, and then Heroku, those free dynos, they are super slow. I have another backend running there, but it's not that important, so I'm not throwing money at that. But this I'm paying for, so it's a bit faster now. Like it's fast enough, and there has been not that much load yet. It's mostly me and the cron job that checks that the page is working. And then stuff I learned, always try to serve content from cache to end users, because then you can have a lot faster response times, and then just update the cache edit every time you need to update it. And I have like 1 minute TTL for the status, and that's even could be a lot longer. It's not that critical data. And having just single command deployments for a backend and front end is pretty nice for a tiny project, that is. Like, of course, not for a real world bigger project. I think I have this is slide 3 out of 3. Anyways, Elm is pretty nice. I think the most challenging part for me was writing the JSON decoders in the Elm code, and I was almost going to give up and just change my backend so that I don't need to write the JSON decoder in like I had a nested object that I wasn't almost able to decode. But then it worked out, and and then upgrading to Elm 0.19 is a pain in the ass, but the new builds are a lot smaller, and I think if it's doable, you should upgrade every project to 0.19. And then I found it pretty confusing how to install Elm packages, because I have been used to like npm packages. You just do npm install. But if you wouldn't know that, you would go to the package GitHub page or npm page and then look at the installation instructions. But in Elm, nobody adds those instructions. You just have to know that it's elm-package install and then the package name. And then even that was changed. So now in 0.19 it's Elm install. So Elm, space install. So I was struggling with that a bit. And after doing this project, I actually did my first PR, Elm PR at Sanoma, to a quite big project there, and it was not a big stress to jump into the code base because of the Elm stuff I had been doing here. So I think that helped me. And yeah, in conclusion, do write some shitty useless side project, because in the end, if you do a side project, at least you learn something, but it might even turn out useful. I've heard some people actually use this service, and if I need to travel by metro, I actually check this service. And it's fun. And in addition to all of this, you can also get spice hours for this. And the good thing is you can just try out whatever technology you want. There's no one is going to tell you that, hey, don't do that. You can just write shitty code like I did, or then you can use some cool technologies. And you can rewrite it. If it's a small project, you can rewrite it as many times as you want. And I think we should almost have a Futurice most useless side project award. I think I'm a good candidate right now, but I think we need some competition. So that's just my suggestion. So yeah, here I'll share the slides in there, and here are some links to the services I'm using. Thanks. Go to onkometrorikki.fi and follow the tweet bot. Thank you. So, any questions? Can we use the mic?
Can we have like a dedicated tech weekly for this sort of shitty side projects that we've started and are still alive?
Yeah, let's do that.
Awesome.
It's my luck again. No, I have better luck this time. Thanks, this was really fun. What about Zeit if you wanted to use it for like a professional project? Would that be a good idea in your opinion? Is it expensive?
I haven't checked the pricing at all because, of course, this is free. So okay. I don't know, but it feels like people are actually using it. I don't know. I don't know about some real world projects who are actually using it, but I think there have some. Do they have
like
some?
15 a month for a small team.
15 euros per month?
Yeah, but I don't know what the team accounts is.
Yeah. But I think, yeah. Okay, here they have some prices.
All right, cool, thank you.
Any questions from remote people?
What do you intend that you want to do next with your project? What new feature do you think would be useful?
The different languages to the front end, the UI, and then rewrite the backend. Although it's not a feature, it doesn't change anything, but it's crappy, so I want to rewrite it.
And do you want to form a company to do this?
Yeah, if there's a business opportunity, but no, there is no. Or Broken Metro stories. Is there such thing? Oh yeah, should start. All right, thank you.